Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
This is the Daily Memphian Politics Podcast. I'm Bill Dries. A full edition and then some this time around. Coming up, Shelby County Election Commission Chairman Brent Taylor, and our rundown of the past week, including a proposal for a Nashville-based super chancery court, city and county budget proposals, early ballpark estimates of the new and lower recertified property tax rates to come, an ambitious yet familiar plan to restructure Shelby County schools, and reaction to the Derek Chauvin guilty verdicts in Minneapolis. First up, the job of Memphis Police Director gets a title change and a nominee. Memphis Mayor Jim Strickland saying the job is now referred to as Police Chief, since that is the title used in a lot of other cities. And for the first time in 38 years, the leader of the MPD will be someone who is not from the ranks of the department. For the first time in the 49-year history of the job, she will be a cop from another city. Strickland's nominee goes to the Memphis City Council next month for a vote. We are joined now by C.J. Davis, the nominee to be the city's next police chief, currently the police chief in Durham, North Carolina. Chief Davis, this came together rather quickly after the International Association of Chiefs of Police submitted a list of 7 finalists to Mayor Strickland. Tell me how you became interested in this position in this city at this time.
Well, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak today. My tenure in the city of Durham is right at about 5 years right now. And, I was very interested in pursuing a position in a larger agency. And I wanted to make sure also that the position in the jurisdiction that I applied in was one that would be a good fit for me. There were other opportunities out there, but to tell you the truth, the timing just was not right for me. The Memphis process was moving along quickly, and I just was not at a point where I could walk out the door of my city in the middle of a budget process, in the middle of COVID, in the middle of having conversations about defunding the police. And, I pulled my application back and said, I just can't do this right now. And then it appeared that the process lasted a little bit longer. We were getting through our budget process. And I had a change of heart and said, I'm going to see if I can't put my application back in here and see whether or not I can, pursue this position, since we're getting closer to June. And that would be a good time for me to be able to make an exit that's not slamming the door on a city that's been good to me.
Right. So what do you see the police department's role as being in policies and decisions that are made in other parts of the criminal justice system, the courts, with prosecutors, state laws, those kind of things?
Well, I think it's important to have a good relationship with the courts, my DA's office, my judges. I work really closely with the criminal justice system in the city of Durham, mainly because they need to really understand, the work that my officers are doing every day, and really understand that when we produce a case, this is a case or an individual that is someone who's dangerous in the community. So as it relates to MOUs and policies that affect the criminal justice system and the prosecution of individuals that are doing harm in the community, I think it's really important that we work together and have agreement on how we process those cases and what those various stages entail.
And in terms of those people where there might be some question about whether a prosecution at a certain level is the best response to that, should the police department be involved in those decisions as well?
Well, I'll share this with you that my department currently has a program that is being duplicated in other cities now. It's a misdemeanor diversion program where officers are mandated to give community members and mostly young people an opportunity to go through a diversion program as opposed to being charged with a misdemeanor if they've never had any type of record. Last year or year before last, in 2019, we sent 267 young people through misdemeanor diversion. That was 267 young people that didn't go to jail, that didn't have a record, that completed the program and didn't reoffend. So having these various alternatives to, we want to put the worst of the worst, out of our community, but at the same time, we want to give a chance and an opportunity for a productive life for some of our other young people who happen to get caught up in the criminal justice system.
Mm-hmm. The city is currently working outside the structure of the police department on a violence intervention program, and you know this, but for the people listening, these are people trying to intervene in violent crimes with victims and with those charged and those who know people on both sides of a violent act. Is that a good idea on its face, and does it work in other places that you've seen?
Well, it's a relatively new model. And of course, Chicago has a violence interrupter program in the city of Durham. My city has a violence interrupter type of program too. It's called Bull City United. And those individuals actually are boots on the ground, and some of them justice involved persons that are working, like you said, outside of the police department independently to intercept and intervene to prevent violence. So the city of Durham is now in this year's budget is adding 18 more violence interrupter positions so that we can have other alternatives to reducing crime as opposed to just being responsive by police.
Mm-hmm. And how many years has it been in place in Durham?
It's been in place since about 2015.
Okay. All right. Yep. So something of a track record there.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. A big question here, and I think police departments all over the country are dealing with issues of how many people are in the ranks. Do more police officers, though, just their presence, mean less crime, just as a general proposition?
Well, I believe that visibility is a deterrent. It absolutely is a deterrent. People are less likely to commit crimes in the presence of police officers. And I'll give you an example. We've rolled out in the city of Durham, in one of our high crime areas, a community engagement unit of 10 officers that were funded by the Department of Justice. But those officers have an apartment in that complex as a sort of substation, but their work is a soft presence. They do after school labs with kids, they do cleanups in the community, but just their presence there alone has reduced violence more than 40% in that particular community over the last 3 or 4 years. That was the worst area in the city when I first started working with the city of Durham. So that soft presence, not an over-policing kind of presence, a relationship-building presence, has been a deterrent to crime.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there is a gap between the training of police and what becomes the everyday way that policing is done through the experience and shorthand, if you will, of police officers who are out there on the streets?
Well, I think the initial training is really critically important, but I think where we miss is that the ongoing training throughout an officer's career is even more important, because once an officer leaves his initial academy training and goes off onto the street, then that basic training should not be the only training that he has on especially key elements like implicit bias, emotional intelligence, de-escalation, some of those critical elements that they need throughout their entire career.
Mm-hmm. And is there something that happens though with police officers on the street where they come to regard the training as being, okay, well that's in a textbook. This is the real world. Is there a gap between that you've seen or experienced?
I think it has been in the past, but I think we've done better as an industry to have more practical, more realistic type of training now, and really immersing officers in real life types of scenarios and situations, as opposed to just checking the box. Because that checking the box we did culture diversity, got 10 of the answers correct, check the box, is done, and then it's not applied practically in the street. So I think we've done better over the last decade, and I think even in the last couple of years, on the heels of some of these very, very serious incidents, that training is looking totally different than it was in the past.
All right, a final point. We saw several contenders who had points in their careers where they were disciplined or they were fired and appealed. And part of the reaction here has been, why are there finalists for the top police job in this city who have that in their records? Is there something about the nature of police work, the move through the ranks to leadership positions, that is involved or a consideration that comes into play?
I believe so. It's very hard to have a career where you're very involved and engaged without, something happening in your career, whether it's something that you did that's your fault, or whether or not you were just under attack. And I can say that in my career, I was under attack. And, fortunately, I fought that attack. I'm a person of integrity, and, the city that I work for now, they know that, they appreciate that. And my record has shown, has demonstrated that. And it's just hard to do this kind of work without being exposed. I put it that way, exposed to negative elements.
Is that anything that can be reformed, or is that kind of the nature of this job?
I don't think it's the nature of the job per se. I think there could be better checks and balances in place to make sure that the same critical eye that we place on various investigations out in the field, we place that same critical attention to the investigations internally as well. Our job should be about getting to the truth, no matter what. Whether it's about an officer or whether it's about a citizen, our job should be about getting to the truth.
Our conversation with C.J. Davis, the police chief of Durham, North Carolina, who is the mayor's nominee to be the next Memphis police chief. We recorded that about an hour or so before the guilty verdict this past week in the trial of Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin and the Memorial Day death of George Floyd there. So much reaction to this in a city that saw 12 consecutive days of protest and 100 arrests after Floyd's death, as well as police reform slates proposed before the Memphis City Council and the Shelby County Commission. Strickland reacting to the verdict at the top of his budget address just after the verdict was rendered in Minneapolis. Quote, "While I don't think there will ever be true closure for George Floyd's family, I do pray that the trial and the jury verdict will bring some peace to his family and to our country." Congressman Steve Cohen tweeting, "The jury has spoken, justice has been served." No reaction from the city's other representatives in Washington, Congressman David Kustoff or Senators Bill Hagerty and Marsha Blackburn, as we record. To the budgets, the city budget proposal is $716 million, that's the operating budget, $89 million in the capital budget resolution. 2% pay raises for police and fire, one-time bonuses for essential city employees in the pandemic. $2 million for the city's violence intervention program in the new fiscal year, as the city council again delayed a vote this past week on the administration's attempt to stand up the civilian program in the last 2 months of the current fiscal year. Strickland says the recertified Memphis property tax rate, considering the recent property reappraisal for taxation purposes, looks to be between $2.75 and $2.80 compared to the current rate of $3.19. Without federal aid directly related to the pandemic, Strickland says the city budget would have been $18 million in the red. Other federal aid will be used for revenue losses and sales tax that is part of the Downtown Tourism Development Zone and losses in the hotel-motel tax revenue. The city's annual pension contribution is about $9 million less in the new fiscal year than the current fiscal year, and Strickland is using those savings in place of annual revenue growth. Shelby County's consolidated budget, $1.4 billion, as proposed by Shelby County Mayor Lee Harris. When we say consolidated budget, this is not just the county administration led by Harris. It includes almost a dozen countywide elected officials who hold offices like court clerks, trustee, those kind of positions. Back to the county budget outlook. No property tax hike, a 2% pay raise for all county employees, and raising county government's minimum hourly pay to $15.29. The pandemic was a theme in Harris's budget message, like it was in Strickland's. But there was another theme: avoiding the contentious county budget season of a year ago that saw the county commission reject Harris's budget proposal, including a wheel tax hike, and basically build its own. Harris noting that the budget passed last spring started $10 million in the red and used $9.6 million from the county's reserve or fund balance, adding, quote, "It only got worse from there in terms of spending." His budget plan this year would make a $19 million payment toward restoring the county reserve. The county also will not be issuing any long-term debt in the new fiscal year. Over 6 years, there is $32 million worth of county fire department upgrades planned, including 2 new fire stations in South Cordova, recently de-annexed from the city of Memphis, and another in southeast Shelby County. No estimate from Harris on where the new certified county property tax rate will fall. The state expected to have that next month in writing and on the record. But as you can see from Strickland's budget address, some folks are already doing some ballpark math. In the case of the county's current $4.05 property tax rate, the ballpark estimate at this point is that in the new certified rate, it will drop to below $3.50. When he left the position of Shelby County School Superintendent 2.5 years ago, Dorsey Hobson left an ambitious reorganization of the school system's schools and their placement on the table. His successor, Joris Ray, initially cool to the idea, has now rolled out a very similar 10-year plan. Here are the basic elements. Close 13 to 15 schools. Add 5 new buildings, renovate or expand 13 existing schools, and lots of deferred maintenance, a fact of life for Shelby County Schools pre-merger and demerger when it was Memphis City Schools. 2 schools named at the outset as those that would be closed if the school board approves: Shady Grove Elementary and Northwest Prep Academy. The plan has a lot of K through 8 and 6 through 12 grade structures, indicating a move away from middle schools that allow the school system to fold middle schools that are close to elementary and high schools. Hobson's consolidation of elementary schools close to each other in the same neighborhoods set the stage for this further move, and it created a lot of goodwill on the county commission, which is the local funder of Shelby County Schools, to the tune of more than $400 million. Ray's plan has 5 new schools built for a total of $335 million between 2025 and 2031, starting with a new $89 million Fraser High School that would be a 9 to 12 school, probably closing or converting Tresvant High School. Keep in mind that the new Collierville High School came in at around $80 million. The $34 million Orange Mound K through 8 in the Shelby County Schools plan would combine Bethel Grove, Cherokee, and Dunbar. Sheffield and Wooddale High Schools get combined into the $89 million Southeast High School. At the fairgrounds, Maxine Smith STEAM Academy moves out of the old Fairview Junior High School building and into East High School's STEM program. Middle College High School stays at Central and East Parkway with more middle college seats there. White Station elementary and middle school students go to Dexter, K through 8. Dexter elementary students become part of Brownsville Road Elementary. More about all of this and the reporting on this so far and to come from Deja Henry. After an unsuccessful bid to oust Davidson County Chancellor Ellen Hobbs Lyle, Republican state legislators in Nashville are proposing the creation of what is being called a super chancery court with a 3-judge panel appointed by the governor before going on the ballot in 2022. The court would have exclusive original jurisdiction over any lawsuits that challenge measures on constitutional grounds. That would also apply to challenging state laws and includes cases contesting the upcoming redrawing of district lines in the Tennessee legislature, a process the legislature itself controls. The court could also take any case referred to it by the Tennessee Attorney General, the state's attorney in such litigation. Chancery courts across the state with elected judges are usually the destination for any lawsuits involving a dispute with a state or local government body and disputes between such bodies. Joining us now is Shelby County Election Commission Chairman Brent Taylor, a former county commissioner and city council member. He's been on the Election Commission since April of 2019 and was elected chairman by his fellow Election Commission members earlier this month. So Brent, let's start with the legislature and all of the proposals concerning voting in Tennessee that are pending, moving, some of them even dead in the legislature at this point. Proposals from all sides of the question of what is needed and what is not needed in our elections. When you look at that large number of proposals, about 24 by our count a month ago, what are the themes and directions that you see in them?
Well, I think what you're seeing nationally is a push among a lot of legislatures to really codify many of the relaxed rules that were put in place for the 2020 election because of the pandemic. If you recall, going back prior to the pandemic, there were a lot of court cases dealing with absentee balloting, drop-off boxes, extended hours. You can remember all of the things that were occurring in the court cases prior to the election. And then after the election, you're seeing a lot of the legislatures now moving in an attempt to codify those relaxed rules. And some states are more successful at it than others. Many of the states with Democratic majorities in the legislature, they're having much more success in codifying those rules than in some of the Republican-controlled legislature states. As it relates to Tennessee, as you know, we've got a super majority Republican General Assembly. So I think a lot of the things that you're seeing occur in other states, like drop-off boxes, mailing out absentee balloting, those types of things, I think will really be difficult to accomplish in Tennessee just because of the supermajority of the Republican legislature. However, there are some bills out there that are in the legislature making their way through that does have an impact on elections. Some really identify Shelby County, particularly with Representative Leatherwood's bill to eliminate party primaries for county offices. It's my understanding that bill did not survive the session,
right?
But it would have essentially barred party primaries in those elections. And I think the reason behind Representative Leatherwood and offering that bill was really to treat county elections like city elections. And that is, there are no party primaries. It's, everybody identifies with a party or aligns with a party, but there are no hard party labels on the ballot with a D or an R. And so I think the thinking was that you could have a lot more people stand a chance of winning elections if you didn't have hard party labels on it. However, that bill died in the legislature.
Right. And well, since we're on that topic, we're over 20 years now that we've had partisan primaries in Shelby County elections. What do you think the impact has been?
Well, I think therein lies the rub, right? I think the perception is that Republicans enjoyed the party primaries for 20 plus years because they benefited from it. And now then there's just been a demographic shift and a partisan shift in the county that no longer works as well as it did. And so with the adoption of a prohibition to partisan elections, partisan primaries, then Republicans could stand a chance of winning more local offices. However, you see the same thing, not to get off topic of election, but you see the same thing with the Supreme Court and the issue of court packing and so forth. You know, Democrats now claim they want to pack the court or unpack it, depending on how they're framing the debate, where they add Supreme Court justices because it's a fair thing to do. And it's been since 1869 since we've had 9 justices, and we need to improve that. Well, they weren't interested in improving it when the liberals control the court. Now the conservatives control the court, they want to change the rules. So I think both parties tend to do that with equal effect.
Yeah, and to be fair, there have been times when there have been some Democratic Party leaders who have said, "Let's do away with the partisan primaries." The problem is one of the sides always has an advantage at some point when this discussion comes up.
That's right. And 25 years ago, if you recall, Bill, and you and I both were around then, the Republicans moved to create the party primaries, and Democrats resisted. Matter of fact, I think they went through about 2 election cycles where they did not nominate or did not have any official nominees. And they got defeated in the election. And finally, Democrats accepted the fact that partisan primaries are here, and they have obviously had party primaries and most successfully the last countywide election where the Democrats swept all the county offices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's this originally started out actually in the mid-1980s. There were some elements on the local Democratic Executive Committee who actually favored having primaries. That died down. Then Republicans actually acted first, and the Democratic Executive Committee actually named the first nominees in straight up primary contest. Let's move back to elections. As things stand today, with the laws now on the books here in Tennessee, what else do you think Tennessee needs, Shelby County needs, in the way of changes to how elections are conducted, regardless of what the political balance is in the legislature?
Yeah, I would say first, let me say our role, the way I view our role as the Election Commission, really is not to be involved in the partisan issues of the day surrounding elections. Our job is really to appear to be as nonpartisan or bipartisan in terms of how we conduct ourselves, because the elections are important, and we don't want to be appearing that we have our thumb on the scale in any kind of way. All we really want are clear and transparent elections. And the most confidence one can have in the elections, the ones that are done fairly, openly, and timely. And so one of the things that would be a big help to the Election Commission in terms of getting votes out on election day is currently state law says that we cannot release early voting. Matter of fact, we can't even begin counting early vote totals until the last person has voted on election night. Then we can begin counting absentee ballots and early votes. And if there were a change in state law that would help us get vote totals out more quickly would be perhaps a change that would allow us to tabulate early vote and absentee votes on election day, but not release those totals until after the last person has voted in the precincts on election day. Then we could release those totals that we've counted during the day.
Do some counties, though, interpret that state law differently? Because you've heard the complaint is probably more than I have that well Davidson, not in this last election but in previous elections, Davidson County, Nashville has their returns a few minutes after 7.
Now, I've heard that, and obviously I can't speculate on how Davidson County interprets that law. I just know that the State Election Commission in the Secretary of State's office has told us that state law says you cannot count or tabulate those votes until the last person has voted. If another county is doing that outside the parameters of the law, I can't speak to that. The only other county that would be similar to us would probably be Davidson County, maybe Hamilton County and Knox County. But most of the counties in Tennessee are rural counties, and it doesn't take that long to count what few absentee ballots or early voting ballots that they may have. It's in these large urban counties where you could have thousands upon thousands of absentee or early voting that really becomes an issue. There are state legislators that have heard our plea. I know there has been discussion in the legislature about allowing us to do that, but heretofore nothing's occurred.
Mm-hmm. In August and the November elections of last year here in Shelby County, we saw much larger numbers of absentee voters. How much of that surge was voters who were able to cast absentee ballots because of access opened up by the pandemic? And how much of that was voters over 60 years old realizing that they can vote absentee even without the pandemic?
There was probably some of both. Obviously, the pandemic drove that. But I do think there is a segment of that. There's no way to quantify it, but I think there's a segment of the people who were eligible anyway, who may not have known that they were eligible, or they might not have known how easy it is to cast an absentee ballot, that were just didn't know. They thought maybe it was more difficult than it was, and thought, well, I'll just vote on election day or go vote early. But I do think, but I think the crux of your question is how much of this absentee balloting will continue to occur after we've reached herd immunity, right, and things have relaxed with the pandemic. And I do think from this point forward, we're going to continue to see a lot of absentee balloting being cast.
Mm-hmm. What's your opinion on drop-off boxes?
It's my understanding that drop-off boxes grew out of the pandemic, that there weren't that other jurisdictions didn't have them. We certainly didn't have them here. I will tell you, I have a personal opinion, but I think it's more important for me to be agnostic here because we're going to implement whatever the state law allows us to do. If the legislature says that they want us to have drop-off boxes, we'll have drop-off boxes, and we'll do it to make sure that we can protect the security of the ballots and make sure that every vote is counted. But we don't make that policy, and we just follow the directives of the legislature.
Mm-hmm. So the general plan is to have a new voting system here in Shelby County for the next elections in 2022. The May county primaries about a year away at this point. Tell me where that process is.
Well, as you know, back in April, I believe it was, of last year, the county commission adopted a resolution urging the election commission to adopt hand-marked paper ballots. And at the time, we had an RFP out for the various vendors to submit bids for election equipment. Part of those bids were hand-marked paper ballots. Also, the bids included ballot marking devices. And so those bids were received. There was a bipartisan scoring committee made up of both Democrats and Republicans that reviewed all of the bids, heard the presentations from the various companies. And by the way, I might also add, there are only 4 approved vendors for election equipment in Tennessee, and only 3 bid on the proposal. And so this bipartisan scoring committee made up of Democrats and Republicans scored the equipment that ES&S had as the highest score. And that is who the election administrator recommended to the Election Commission. And we ultimately approved her recommendation and sent then the proposal to the county commission, because the county commission has to approve the contract and obviously pay for the equipment. When we took the recommendation from the election administrator, I actually made the motion that we, instead of the election commission dictating how the voter would cast their vote, and rather than a county commission dictating how the voter would cast their vote, I actually made a motion, and what we sent to the county commission was a hybrid. And that was the voter decide how they want to cast their vote. So we included in the budget enough money for ballot marking devices and for hand-marked paper ballots. And then the voter would decide when they enter the polling place how they want to cast their vote, if they want a hand-marked paper ballot or do it on a ballot marking device. The scanners that we purchased read both types of ballots. It can read a hand-marked paper ballot, and it can read a ballot marking device ballot. And the scanner is actually where the votes are tabulated. And so I thought the best way to compromise or split the baby was to have a proposal where the voter gets to decide how they want to cast their ballot. So that's what we actually sent to the county commission. There was much debate, and the county commission ultimately turned down our proposal because the contract we were asking them to approve was more than the base bid. Well, the reason it was more than the base bid was because at our commission level, we had moved for this hybrid system where the voter gets to decide how to cast their ballot, whether it be hand or marked or ballot marking device, and that added to the cost. We thought it was worthwhile because the voter remains in control. So the county commission turned it down, and when they turned it down, they said it was because the contract didn't match the base bid. So we came back at a subsequent meeting and adopted what we called a skinny resolution, and that was ballot marking devices. The contract matches exactly what the bid came in at. And it went through the bowels of county government and made all the way to the county commission, and the county commission refused to place it on the agenda. And so there it languished. And a couple of meetings ago, the election commission finally voted to retain an attorney for the possibility of going to Chancery Court and enforcing the chancellor to purchase the equipment that we need. So last thing, Bill, and that is that state law is pretty specific, and it says that the county commission shall fund the operations and equipment of the election commission. I'm paraphrasing, but it uses the term shall. And it's no different than a police director or a fire director saying this is the equipment we need to do our job, and the county commission funds it. We're saying we're charged with the responsibility to conduct elections in this county, and we've instructed the county commission what equipment we need to do that. And under state law, it's their obligation to fund it.
So you've and the last development that I know of was that you had hired counsel to explore this point, but no lawsuit has been filed the last time I checked.
That is correct. And matter of fact, since my election as chairman, I have reached out to a couple of county commissioners to say, look, I would really like to meet with you. I believe we can work this out and avoid a protracted legal battle. And let's save the taxpayer the money on the lawsuits, and let's work this out, because I really don't think we're that far apart. It's just that both sides have kind of gotten entrenched. But since my election as chairman, I have reached out to some county commissioners in an attempt to avoid the lawsuit, and let's just try to figure out how we can work this out for the benefit of the voter and the taxpayer.
So those talks are still ongoing?
Correct.
Okay. Have you or the commission put any kind of time limit on it?
Well, the time limit is the election.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you start with the election and back up, we're about a year away from the election, which would be the primary election in 2022.
Mm-hmm. Including early voting starting.
Including early voting, that's right. So you start backing up, we're about 11, 12 months out. So ideally, then the reason I want to try to work this out with the county commission is that's the most expedient way to get this resolved, is if we could reach an agreement with the county commission, we could go ahead and purchase the equipment and get it in place so that we could be educating the voter that you're going to be voting on a new voting machine. We can also do adequate training for all of the election workers that will be working the precincts and election day, so we can get them properly trained so that we can have as smooth an election as possible. Obviously, if we wind up having to go to Chancery Court, that's not a speedy process or the easiest way to get this done. And we will literally be bumping up against the election calendar in 2022, rolling out new equipment with a short period of time to get training done and to educate the public. Last thing on that point, and that is the machines that we're currently using are 15 years old. The vendor has indicated they're no longer supporting the equipment, and we can no longer get parts for the election equipment, and we're actually having to cannibalize election machines, voting machines, so that we can keep enough voting machines going to conduct elections. So we're just not in a real good place, and we desperately need the approval of this new equipment so we can get it in place before the 2022 election. Because we're going to have a really long ballot next year with all the judicial races. And I just really fear going into the election with equipment that's not even supported by the manufacturer any longer.
Right. Next year is indeed the year of what is known in political circles as the big ballot, with the judges who have the 8-year terms of office coming around for that particular cycle. A final question, with much more to come on all of these issues. Has our experience in the 2020 presidential election, do you think, kind of turned the tables of the discussion here locally? Because Democrats were very concerned here locally that continuing to use a touchscreen machine or a ballot marking device instead of hand-marked paper ballots was a recipe for possible fraud. And we heard fraud claims from the Trump campaign in 2020, and then the two sides on this in terms of the partisan divide kind of reversed here locally. Has that kind of affected the discussions that are going on about this behind the scenes?
Not really. It has not, primarily because the decision has been made. There's no new pending decision. It has to be made by the Election Commission on this. But the 2020 election is interesting to look at for a couple of reasons. One, President Trump and Giuliani and Sidney Powell and all the folks that were involved in the legal challenges following the November election last year, they made all kinds of claims about election machines, ballot marking devices, but they only made those claims publicly. And when they would get into court, they would not make those same claims. And there was no credible evidence that ballot marking devices changed votes, deleted votes, added votes, subtracted votes, or in any way impacted the election. However, I think there was credible evidence that there were a lot of absentee ballots that were counted that arrived late. A lot of times some of the courts extended the deadline by which you could accept absentee ballots. There were questions about absentee ballots showing up in the dark of night after the campaign or after the voters. After the election workers had left, that they would roll in additional absentee ballots. And so all the problems in the 2020 election seem to be about absentee ballots, which in my view are hand-marked paper ballots by design.
Right.
And but there has been no credible evidence that there was any nefarious activity surrounding ballot marking devices. So I still believe ballot marking devices are the safest, most secure way to cast a vote. I know that Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and President Trump would probably disagree with that, but I happen to believe ballot marking devices are the safest way to cast a ballot. Hand-marked paper ballots present a whole new set of problems, and I'm somewhat surprised that when we were debating ballot marking devices and hand-marked paper ballots, the Democrats were the ones who were pushing for the hand-marked paper ballots. And I just find it almost amusing that the Democrats would trust a Republican election commission after the polls have closed when a ballot has been overvoted or undervoted, and they're going to leave it to a Republican commission to try to divine the will of the voter. And with a ballot marking device, it is impossible. The computer will not allow you to double vote or undervote. If you try to mark two different names in the same race, it won't let you do that. However, in a hand-marked paper ballot, voters sometimes mark two different candidates in the same race. That gets kicked out, and then we have to try to go through and try to figure out what the intent of the voter was. If you remember the 2000 election down in Florida, where they had election officials holding up ballots trying to determine whether that was a hanging Chad or a pregnant Chad, or trying to divine what the will of the voter was. And, under state statute, the Republican Commission or the election commission locally is Republican controlled. So if I were the Democrats, I would not want us counting ballots. I would prefer to have an objective ballot marking device that won't allow a voter to overvote in a race.
All right. A quick point, and then I promise we'll let you go. In the current talks that are underway with the county commission, between the county commission and the election commission, is the option for hand-marked paper ballots part of that discussion, or is this strictly about a contract that is the basic, keep the touchscreen machines, put a paper readout on there, run it through a scanner, and then the paper copy is another stream of data or another audit trail for it? Well,
the talks are very preliminary. Right now, we're in discussions about trying to meet so that we can discuss the contract and find out if there is any compromise, any way that we can come together and make sure that we balance the needs of the election commission with those of the county commission. So at this point, we've not had any substantive discussion about the merits of the contract or the merits of how we mark a ballot. The conversations up to now have been just how can we meet? What's the best way to meet? Do we think if we met, we could resolve this and avoid a lawsuit? So the conversation is very preliminary at this point.
All right, we'll leave it there. We've been talking with Shelby County Election Commission Chairman Brent Taylor. Behind the headlines on WKNO this week is a repeat of our discussion from a few weeks back about the pandemic's impact on the tourism and hospitality industries in our city. Our guest, Denny Riley of the Majestic and the Downtown Memphis Commission, as well as Kevin Kane, the head of Memphis Tourism. Subscribe to the Daily Memphian at dailymemphian.com. You can subscribe to this podcast and our others at Google Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. I'm Bill Dries. The Daily Memphian Politics Podcast is produced by Kix Patterson.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.